Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox-Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Today's leader is a leader among these leaders, Mayor Nan Whaley. Nan is a mayor's mayor. She fights for her community and for the revitalization of all cities. She's navigated her city through 8 incredibly challenging years. We talk about how she did that and the lessons she learned that all leaders can draw from her experience. We also talk about her passion for government as an instrument for good. Big things are ahead for Nan. Listen to hear why we need her on a bigger stage. Nan Whaley, welcome to An Honorable Profession. It's wonderful to talk to you. You're one of my favorite mayors in America right now.
Well, thank you. That's awful kind. But you probably say right now after each mayor you talk to, right?
No, but you've held that post for a while. You're definitely always top tier in my book.
Thank you. That's so nice.
There's so many issues I want to talk to you about. But before we begin, I feel like we need to address an issue that comes up all too frequently in America, and that's the issue of gun violence. We are 2 weeks out from shootings in Atlanta and 1 week out from shootings in Boulder as we record this interview. You yourself experienced a mass shooting in your community. Can you talk a little bit about how you as a leader and a mayor help navigate your community in the wake of violence like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's so tough, Ryan, is that right now, as we're coming out of COVID, you're going to see probably these mass shootings come back. It's one of the things you didn't see as much in COVID because people were all not in public spaces. And so now that there's public spaces and people are out and about more, I think they've become like just very all too common. And particularly now, Atlanta and Boulder brings it, kind of rearing back to the Dayton community as well. And every community that's gone through this, which is just too many of us. And for us in Dayton, it's something that is like all the other cities where we haven't really seen any sort of movement on common sense gun legislation. We haven't seen really anything change when this is so easy to fix, frankly, with legislators just doing what the public's calling for. A huge majority of the public supports common sense gun legislation, but it's just an example, I think, one of the most glaring examples on how the democracy is broken.
And do you have any ideas of how to move forward on that legislation? You were a national advocate on this. You worked towards trying to find bipartisan approach. What's the missing piece for us to address and just stop these horrific killings in our communities?
Well, I mean, I think we get closer and closer every single cycle, actually. And it's probably, unfortunately, because it's just become so common now that it's affecting so many people. It's affecting how people are voting, frankly, and it's affecting decisions of people in Congress in a really direct way. So I think we actually get closer every cycle. I think in 2018, that was the first, time they showed that there was actually more gun sense voters than NRA voters, as their top decision when they do exit polling and ask people what's of top of mind. So we saw that real switch in 2018. And then in 2020, I think we continue to see an increase of people being elected like Mark Kelly in the Arizona Senate, where this has just had a personal effect on them. And so having those personal leaders that have personally gone through gun violence, I think helps this issue move forward. I'm in Ohio right now, and unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to become it won't be a solve that the state does. The governor at first here after Dayton said he was going to do common sense gun legislation. He obviously didn't push it through, and then signed actually Stand Your Ground, which is a heinous bill that makes our communities less safe, not more safe, and just showed just how hollow his words were on this. And so I don't think we'll see any real movement unless it comes from Congress, at least for Ohioans. I think there's some states that will get some state movement, but for us in Ohio, I think it will have to come from the Capitol.
And after your shooting, in the weeks, months, and years after the 10 people were killed and 27 were injured in Dayton, how did you help the community come to terms with that event and heal that event? What's it like being a mayor of a city after one of these horrendous events?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that you have to do with any crisis, and unfortunately, we do get like some small training in this from the U.S. Conference of Mayors about what to do. And so I think first, I would say communicate. Like any crisis, you want to tell what you know and tell what you don't know, and be really honest and be willing to communicate regularly with the public. One of the things I didn't realize that was happening, I didn't really understand that it was a national story, the Dayton shooting, and that's probably best. I didn't really realize that when we were going through it. And I really thought I was just talking to the reporters I didn't realize they were taking the press conferences live on TV and showing them, front to back, at least on the local news they'd break and just show them. So I really didn't understand just how many people were directly seeing the press conferences. It's something I shared with mayors since then. There's just such an opportunity for direct conversation now because of the way our media works, that's a little different than just telling the reporters and the reporters telling, the mass folks. And so obviously that communication is really, really key. Second thing for us was, and Bill Peduto, who had the mayor of Pittsburgh, who had the Tree of Life deadly shooting, called me that morning and was like, families and victims first, always think everything through their lens. And it's really great advice. And so really, making sure we didn't, say the names of the victims until we had found the family members, and, not giving them that space and then trying to get the names to the community as quickly as possible. But we did not, the idea of a family member finding out that someone they love is dead via TV or internet was just something we could not have happen. We were successful in getting to them before that. And then, this was a public space in Dayton where the shooting happened. And so, I wanted in it with a lot of local small businesses. And so we didn't want people not to know that this is their space. And so police and fire did an amazing job cleaning the site that day so we could have a vigil at that site that evening. They didn't want it to be roped off for days to be this place where people can't come because it was our space. And that's one of the concerns I think these shootings have, is that you not only, you have such a profound sense of loss of life, but then you have a loss of community. And so I can't tell you just how amazing police and fire were, to make sure that they got everything they needed, were able to clean the scene, and we were able to come to that site that evening.
Wow, that's just something you don't think about in the context. And certainly in Boulder, they're going to have to figure out how to sort of return the space to the community in a way that's
right,
cognizant of the victims and also honors it as a public space.
Right. I think that was probably the most powerful part of that day for me was hundreds, if not thousands of people coming that evening to hold each other, to cry together, to yell together, to demand together, to pray together. It was only around 35 minutes, but it was incredibly powerful of the community. And I think it was key to our ability to heal. And we're not fully healed, I'm not saying that, but I think that vigil that night was an important part of that. And that's where this cry for do something came out of the streets. And, I really felt that's what Dayton was declaring. And unfortunately, they haven't seen any action since August 4th, 2019. And I think that's what's hard for leaders of communities and victims' families is that, you want this tragic event to mean something, right? To at least something good to come out of something so horrific. And what's so frustrating and so appalling about our government is nothing changes, even with this incredible loss of life and community and family.
It is so frustrating and just angering, right? Like it just, at some point, it just, you just are so angry that this keeps happening in this country when, as you said, it's a solvable problem.
Yeah, it does not have to be this way.
Yeah. And, if that was the only crisis that you faced as mayor, that's a major crisis. Yet you faced white supremacist rallies and tornadoes, COVID, an economic crisis, efforts to now address racial injustice. Can you talk a little bit about, what the last couple of years have been like for you and the lessons you've learned?
Ryan, you're making the job sound so glamorous.
Right, exactly. We'll get to the good stuff really soon.
So 2019 and 2020 have been incredibly difficult in Dayton. 2020 has been incredibly difficult for the whole country, right? So between the pandemic and the civil unrest for the demand for racial justice, it's happening in every community. And so honestly, I think, a lot of mayors I've talked to, tell me like 2020 was the hardest year they've had to deal with. And to me, 2019 was so deeply personal. The things that were happening in Dayton felt like they were happening only to us. And so it felt very lonely at times. Where 2020, it was like, oh, everybody's in this pocket. So we have a lot of friends that are dealing with the same issues, which, was helpful in moving through the pandemic. Yeah, I mean, I think we used to tease, my staff and I tease in Dayton that we're really good at managing crisis. And, we're a community that's been in crisis for about 2 years. Really, it's through no fault of Dayton's, own. It's these national issues that have laid to bear locally, whether it be gun violence or, we had these 24 or dozen and a half tornadoes rip through the urban center. Tornadoes aren't supposed to go through urban centers, but because of the extreme weather, even a place like Dayton is experiencing some really tough weather challenges that are more extreme because of climate change. And so, again, something that didn't have anything, it wasn't like specific to Dayton, but it was a national and actually worldwide issue. And then the hate Klan folks actually came over from another state to tell us their feelings. And so again, not Daytonians that we had to deal with. So these are the challenges of leadership right now. And I think, there's no more important time to be a local leader, but I think there's no harder time than to be a local leader right now. What mayors have gone through across this country, because until Biden became president, we had a real lack of federal leadership in 2019 and 2020 with really big issues. And that made it a very lonely job for mayors across the country and local leaders in general. But, particularly I'll speak about mayors because, there was no partner in it. And I've been mayor for 8 years now. And I, was part of when Obama was president and how that relationship with the White House was really close and, like welcoming and sharing of issues and ways that the federal government could help local communities. And, when the Trump administration came in, I think the mayors went to Washington, D.C., and they sent a press release welcoming us, threatening to put 20-some mayors in jail based on their position on immigration. So, I mean, obviously a very different time for us mayors. And then these challenges Dayton came to have in 19 and then the tough 2020 for everybody. It's been, the past 2 years have been like 10 years compared to the first 5, which is so interesting.
It is. And I tell people the same thing. I was in local government in the Obama administration and the Trump administration, just night and day. We had major fires, forest fires all summer long.
Right.
Thousands of homes lost. And we couldn't get anyone from the administration on the phone, much less like there was questions about whether it would even be declared a disaster. It was so hard to try to address these big global issues on your own,
right?
Without the resources of the federal government,
or just even the check-in, right? I think that's the other thing that's so difficult. It feels very lonely. It feels completely different now, Ryan. I mean, the day I teased Julia Rodriguez, who's the head of IGA, like I think the minute that the Biden administration came on, I think I was on a Zoom like every other day with her. So, the connection between the White House and local governments is strong. And certainly with the rescue package, having aid to state and local, just a completely different mindset. And, President Biden came to Ohio this past week, and I, got the chance to thank him for the rescue package. And, I'm the incoming president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And like President Biden does, he went on a soliloquy about how much he loves local government, and how mayors are the key to this work, and how, he looks forward to continuing the partnership. And I know he's like completely authentic and real on it. I know this partnership is going to be real and deep and bipartisan too, I think is, this local government stuff a lot of times doesn't have a partisanship to it. There's no Democrat or Republican pothole. There's just a pothole. So
absolutely
that needs to be filled. So
hopefully we'll just start getting it done with federal assistance, or at least not with the federal government throwing up barriers, making it harder. Can you talk a little bit? You're a huge advocate for the relief package. Can you talk about what that means for Dayton and what you think it means for cities all across the country?
Dayton's had a tough, not just a tough couple of years, but the past, half decade's been very difficult because of deindustrialization, automation, and really, really bad trade deals for Ohio. And that has, affected our wages and loss of job numbers. And so, because of that, that means that, our community has less money to do really the important work of running a city, and then add COVID with less people. So during the 2009 and 10 recession, we lost hundreds of jobs from the city organization. And so we've already been a pretty bare bones organization. And when COVID happened, we furloughed a quarter of our workforce at the beginning, and then 102 took voluntary separation out of a staff of around 1,800. And then to get through 21, we said, no police class, no fire class this coming year. We'll just attrit the retirements and just have smaller classes. So for the practical at the very beginning, really being able to have a police and fire class and reload some of these jobs that we lost during the pandemic is super key to the organization itself. Of course, waiting to see what the Treasury rules and guidelines are for these dollars. But I can tell you that the impacts of the pandemic have, just exasperated already tough issues in our community. And that's what I think is exciting about the American Rescue Plan, is it's talking about how we really do build back better. Okay, what are the thoughtful ways that we can deal with eviction and, keep people housed so we don't have to, number one, have as much transience, take care of, kids. And that's a racial justice issue. In addition here in Dayton, most of the people that are evicted in our community are Black women. So, how do we use these dollars to really keep people in their homes, which these dollars will do, and then help them have a stronger life? I mean, I'm just, of course, to me, the wage issue is an enormous issue here in Dayton. The median income of my community is around $28,000. It's very, very poor. And it's mostly people are working. They're just not getting paid very much here. And so, I think that's something that down the road will be, I think, really important, is getting a real minimum wage. But the rescue plan is incredibly key for this stopgap for us right now. And the thing I'm actually most excited about it, that I think will be the most transformational for Dayton, is the child tax credit. That every person that has a child under 6 years old gets $300 a month. I mean, that will be transformative. We passed universal pre-K in Dayton in 2016 and have made great strides in that work. But what we have found is, our moms just need a little more money. Like the car breaks down and they can't afford to fix the car. They don't have any extra dollars to do that. So their children don't get to preschool, right? Or they don't have, again, this edge of housing issue. So that money will lift half of the children out of poverty. The number of children that will be lifted out of poverty at Dayton will probably be closer to 70%. It will be transformative for my community.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be the thing that people look back in a decade or two and say that was an incredible investment and social program that transformed families and American lives with a relatively small investment. you can help so many families, and then the momentum builds from there.
Yes, it did. It did. So it's just very, very exciting. So I know it's only for 1 year, so we'll have to have the fight to keep that going. But that, pulling children out of poverty, I think, makes transformational lives for the future of my community in 10 to 15 years as well. So very, very exciting.
One of the things I've always appreciated about your leadership on the national level is the way you talk about mid-sized cities. We often spend a lot of time talking about big cities and talking about rural America, and mid-sized cities where most Americans live aren't part of that conversation. Can you talk a little bit about why you think it's important, and then how, as head of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, you're going to try to get mid-sized cities into that conversation?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think, and again, the Trump administration did this a lot. When they talk about cities, they talk about the big guys. And look, we look to the big guys for great leadership and great ideas, but most of the people living in this country are living in cities like Dayton. And those are the cities that are actually having some of the tougher challenges because they don't have as much funding. It's not as big as the bigger cities to be able to, move money around to provide services. And I think a lot of the time, at least in Dayton, we have a bit of a chip on our shoulder because, people call us flyover country, or, you've lost all of this work. And, and typically really that's most cities in America are more like Dayton than they are like Seattle. That challenge is, I think, what's fueling some of the anger that's going on in our country, is that a lot of these mid-sized cities and the people that live in them do feel forgotten and ignored. And so I think it's really important for their leaders to have a voice, to have policy folks think about these communities instead of just the big shiny ones, because I think if you find models for good work that's scalable in these communities, it can be replicated much easier. We can be great laboratories of ideas to, with, partnerships with anchor institutions. We steal each other's ideas really, really fast because, there's so many of us. I think that that's an important context, both to the national narrative, but also I think it helps mayors and their political power as well, so we can get what we need from our cities. I think you saw that when we were doing the rescue plan for the Conference of Mayors. The co-chairs, President Fisher of Louisville, put two of us in charge, myself and the Republican mayor of Arlington, Texas, Jeff Williams. Two cities that aren't really discussed a lot in the national narrative and have very different situations, but still have need. And, for us to be able to share that, I think number one, brought more mayors to the table that were bipartisan in spirit. And number two, really put a different face on what state and local needed, what the needs were, instead of it being just, New York, LA, Chicago, Houston kind of story. And I think that's really important for us as we try to build the power of cities, which is something I'm passionate about in our advocacy with the federal government.
Absolutely. And it's, you're right. The mid-sized cities is where you can try things, and if it works, it will be replicated across the country, and in fact, a plurality of Americans, really. But one of the things that's hard is that a medium-sized city, to compete for federal dollars or to get those federal dollar programs or private philanthropy, it's like you don't have the staff to be able to go out and get the dollars in the same way. And then you're left behind, and it's like it's a reinforcing situation that we need to break out of.
Right. But it's like, I completely agree. And, Dayton isn't a place that has a lot of philanthropy or a lot of, established wealth, even like Pittsburgh, right? Like I always tell Mayor Peduto that, I'd love to have some of his institutional wealth, or even Cleveland actually has a lot more wealth than Dayton does, So when it can get done in Dayton, or it can get done in Akron or Fort Wayne, I'll go through and name all Midwestern cities, but Hartford, Connecticut, like when it can get done in those kind of places, the rest of us take note, because it's not like they have a fancy sponsor or, something that we can't do. And so I think that's why, really sharing these kind of practices is something that I think that really helps the replication of good quality work in our communities. So that's what's exciting about it.
Can you talk a little bit about what, in your view, the Democratic Party as a political party needs to do to connect with some of these, as you say, the flyover cities or these medium-sized cities that are not getting resourced and you know, in some cases turning away from the Democratic Party after years of support? What, in your view, does the party need to do to reconnect and build a constituency out of these mid-sized cities again?
Well, I think it's a lot of issue of style more than anything else. And like, look, I firmly believe that people vote, smart people and people that aren't smart, like all people vote out of emotion rather than rationality. And I know some people like to think they're voting rationally, but I don't think that's true. I think people vote how they feel more than anything. And I think feeling is the most important part of elections. And I think the challenge for us as Democrats is we have a lot of very smart people that are Democrats. I mean, obviously, if you're smart, you're obviously going to be a Democrat, you know.
Right, exactly. It's a given.
So, right. So our challenge is that we have in our party, the other thing we have are people that want to tell each other how smart they are. And that is a real problem in places like where I come from and where I live. I mean, number one, I don't even like it, okay? And I'm a strong Democrat, but I get annoyed by it. And so I'm always like, well, if I'm getting annoyed about it, imagine like what somebody that's an independent or a little further that we're trying to change hearts and minds, they really don't like it. And so I think one of the challenges our party has is I call it like smartest person in the room syndrome. We want to just share our brilliance. And in the way we do it can be condescending. And that doesn't make people feel good. This is an example of when we decided to tell people that voted for Trump that they were conned, which implies they're too dumb to understand what they're doing. Again, doesn't help our cause. I think that's really the biggest thing that's going against us, frankly, is we have a tendency to not be nice. And I think I'll just share this one story. A neighbor of mine who's a big Democrat who watches a lot of MSNBC said to me, can you believe the people in Kentucky that voted for Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell? What were they thinking? And I was like, well, they're probably thinking that Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul don't call them dumb every day. That's what they're thinking. I do understand that anger. I mean, nobody likes to be called stupid. And I think we have a tendency to do that to a lot of voters a lot of time. Or, this trope of, I can't believe these people, I'll put in that air quotes, vote against their self-interest. They're really not. They're really not, because their self-interest is that they are valued as humans and that they have worth and that there is a place for them in this new economy. And a lot of times we don't show it. So that's, I think, our biggest problem with reaching out to voters in my neck of the woods.
I think that's incredibly insightful and good advice. I want to ask you, speaking of arrogance, I don't know if you're going to remember this, but you and I were in a meeting probably 4 years ago, and somebody there who was a very successful businessman started talking to us about how we should run our cities. And if only we did A, B, and C, everything would be fixed. And you blew the roof off the room in your explanation for how different it is and how complex it is to run a government in a community. Not saying that we can't learn things from business, but that we need to. It's a different experience. Different qualities are needed.
Right.
And I think for our listeners, do you want to give a little explanation for why just do this is not a good approach to running a major U.S. city?
Yeah, I mean, that was like the 90s or early 2000s trope. If government was run like a business, that drove me crazy too. And I get dangerous sometimes on these things. So I'll say that whole idea, like a business gets to decide who its customers are, right? They can decide who they want to serve. A city or a government does not get that choice, right? They're serving everybody in those boundaries. They shouldn't. And if they are making those choices, they're not running their government well, because the whole center idea of government is it really does the work that, number one, nobody else will do because there is not a market for it, but it must be done to create market. And so this whole idea, and I'm not saying like there are things, to learn from, business development, but this whole idea that if it's just like a business, I can run government, I just don't buy. And I mean, really the only person, and I have to think some more, but there are leaders that are business leaders that are also good government leaders. Like I think Bloomberg was a good business leader, great business leader, and he was a great mayor. But it has more to do with leadership than I learned what I needed to know in business, because it's a different kind of work. It's not about profits. It's not about shareholders. And I know they want to make this connection of like the citizens are the shareholders, but your citizens, again, it's not just about a bottom line at the end of the day. It's about providing services. And sometimes you have to provide services to people that have no money, have nothing, but providing that service helps the entire collective. And so I really dislike that view. And I think it simplifies the work and the profession of public service. And it also implies, again, that people that choose to do public service are in some ways dumb. And I obviously take great offense to that, because I find in the public sector is, particularly in state and local government, I can't really speak to federal, I've never been in that system, but in state and local government, you have people that will get paid less, work longer just because they believe in the mission, and know that there's no bonus at the end. There's no big payout at the end besides a better community. And that is a really, really special group of people that decide to do this work. There are people, that are doing this work that go up, get up every morning and don't know if they're going to make it home, rationally don't know if they're going to make it home. That's the kind of workers that we have doing this. And I think that it's not something that you can really just run like a business.
I love that explanation. It's very similar to the one that you gave in that room that day. There was a few fewer curse words this time than I remember a couple of years ago. But
I try not to curse on podcasts, but I am a famed cursor in other rooms. So,
can we talk a little bit about what attracted you to public service, your decision to first run for city commission and then your decision to run for mayor? Where does this passion come from?
I was actually a chemistry major in college. I'm a first generation college graduate. My parents went to college. They did not graduate. My brother and I went, and, they were very focused on us finishing and focused on us having a skilled, work. So like we weren't really allowed to pick liberal arts. And that's pretty typical of first generation college graduates. I've noticed it's like, well, you're going to get a degree so you can go make money. And making money is like, to my parents, was like science and business. So my brother was a finance major and I was a chemistry major. And I, by my third year, I really realized like I was not going to do this chemistry. It's, most of the folks that are in chemistry have a more tendency to be introvert. I'm an extreme extrovert. I, would get bored with it, frankly. And so when I was at the University of Dayton, my parents also, my dad was a union steward for UAW in Indiana, and my mom was a local elected official. And when I went to Ohio, which they were not keen about me coming over here, they said, well, they decide presidents. So you should really volunteer for the reelection of Bill Clinton, because he's the only reason why you get to go to college anyway, because he had opened and expanded student loans. This is when I was in the sweet spot of college. College was still affordable, but the student loans had opened it up so we could afford, and I could afford, and my brother could afford to go to school. And so my parents were always very strong and very good about explaining to us how who was elected affected our lives. And I'll tell this one quick story. My very first memory as a child was my mother being upset when I was 4. And I don't know, and this is like in the 1980. It's like those, I can even see the couch. It was like those plaid couches from the 70s, and very unattractive furniture.
I know those couches.
I'm talking about. Yeah, and I'm sitting there, and it's my first memory, and it's because my mother was so upset, and it was the Carter-Reagan debate, and she was like so upset that I think any kind of emotional, that's usually your first memory. And I was like, well, why? What? She kept on saying, this is bad. This is so bad. And I said, well, why is this bad, Mommy? And she said, oh, well, because Ronald Reagan is going to win the election. And that's going to be terrible for our family. And I didn't think it. I mean, I was 4. So I remember this. And my dad he was an iron worker and went inside to work at General Motors. And he was laid off in 81, during that recession. And so we're like 6. My dad's laid off. He's painting like neighbors' houses and just doing what he can to get by. And my brother and I are at dinner. I think I'm like 6 or 7. And my mom's serving dinner. And she says to us, do you know why there's no meat on this table? And like, honestly, Ryan, I didn't notice there was no meat. I'm like 6 or 7. And so I said, well, no. And she said, because Ronald Reagan took the meat off this table. And like, she's so dramatic about everything. So, I mean, I swear to God, the woman, like, if it was raining, it was Ronald Reagan's fault. Like, we couldn't go on vacation, Ronald Reagan. I was terrified of Ronald Reagan, okay? So this has always been, like, they've just been very good. My parents were always very good at equating, like, when, leadership has consequences, and it has consequences for our family. So that was how I was raised. So I have to say that's probably where this all comes from. But when I went to college, I started the University of Dayton College Democrats from there and started volunteering and loved campaigns because they're finite. You have a day and that's it. And that's election day. And really started volunteering and fell in love with it. Never thought I'd run for office. Typical woman, had to be asked when I was around 26, Emily's List, which is the group that works to elect pro-choice women, Democratic women. They came and asked me to run for Congress, which seems kind of insane. They wanted someone that was young, that had no baggage, because we had a first-term congressman here. And I went and they just said to me, well, all you'll need to do is raise $1 million. I'm working class. I was like, $1 million? Like making $20,000 a year? What? So, but that process of them like coming to see me made me realize I wanted to run for city council. And I dutifully emailed them and said, thank you so much. I'm not going to run for Congress. I'm going to run for city commission, we call it here. And of course they were like, well, we don't care about city commission, But I ran as city commission, I was 29. And so I always thank Emily's List, because I never would, even though I was working on campaigns, never was thinking about running for myself, which is one of the things we know about women, is they always have to be asked. And so I served 8 years on commission. And then we had a mayor that was honestly just terrible. And there were 4 other commissioners and myself, and we decided one of us had to run. And I was like, well, I want to run. I was the youngest one, and I was the only woman. And they were like, we agree, you're the one that should run. So I ran against the incumbent and beat him, and then ran 4 years and was unopposed. So, which is the first time that's ever happened in the history of Dayton. So that's how I got into this work. And I'm super grateful for my mom, equating every decision to who the president of the United States was. And my parents, I think they are right that elections have consequences. And we have seen that so starkly between 2016 and 2020.
It's so funny you say that, because I distinctly remember my father, who graduated from UC Berkeley when Ronald Reagan was governor. So Ronald Reagan had signed his diploma. So my father refused to hang the diploma because Ronald Reagan had signed it.
We were raised so well. And I mean, what's so funny about these stories, Ryan, is Ronald Reagan, for the conservatives, they love him and he's considered so great. I mean, he is considered like the devil in my parents' house. So
right.
It's so funny.
And he'd be too moderate for today's Republican Party.
I know.
Which is stunning. To wrap up, you have been, as you mentioned, a tremendous leader in Dayton and got reelected unopposed. You've been a national leader for cities. but you've decided not to seek re-election. And can you talk a little bit about that decision and maybe what's next?
Bittersweet decision for me. I love this city. I do love being mayor, but I've been at City Hall now for 16 years. So I've been basically, grown up there. And I really think, as I was considering what to do next, I really think it's time for Dayton to have some new ideas. And I've endorsed my candidate for mayor, who's terrific. He's a fellow city commissioner and an African-American leader in our community, which I think is really important right now in this moment. And I'm excited to see what new ideas come from new leadership. I mean, he's obviously an ally. We've worked together on this work for the past 8 years together. But I think he'll lead differently. And I think that will be great for Dayton too. I tell folks, people have been so kind in Dayton. I mean, so supportive and so nice. I tease other folks that, people should think about like lame ducking themselves more often, because people are so nice when you decide that you're not going to run. Like, I was going door to door for the candidate that we're running, supporting for mayor. And, they were like so nice on the doors. And I was like, I don't think I would get this nice if I was like running again, they've been just really, really, really gracious and really wonderful. It's a great city. But yeah, I mean, we're thinking about running statewide, and we'll be making an announcement probably in the coming 4 weeks about it. Ohio is a tough state for Democrats, but it's a state I'm committed to. And I do believe, like we talked earlier, that getting the message right, because I do think Democrats are doing really great things for working people. Joe Biden just did tremendous, and the Democrats in the House and Senate just did a tremendous action for working people in my community and people across the state of Ohio. But we can't tell them they're dumb when we're doing it, So I think, getting the right message in Ohio is, I think, key not only for Ohio's future, but for the future of the country. So stay tuned.
I'll be on pins and needles. I can't wait to support you in whatever you do. And I just want to thank you for your leadership, not only for your city, but for all of us in local government. You've been a real voice for not only your community, but for our communities. And I'm grateful for that.
I'm really honored. Thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership and doing great work with the New Deal. It's a great organization, and talk about a place that we steal ideas from. It's definitely the New Dealers. So thank you. Thanks, Ryan.
It's an organization of thieves of good ideas.
Right.
Thank you, Nan, and we look forward to hearing about your future plans and supporting you in whatever way we can.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Have a great one.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders, and keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Road Group produces podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.